Ani, Chris Beaver and Dijnikaz, Alderville and Dunjaba. In the event that anybody in this audience doesn't speak Ojibwe, hello, I'll translate hello. Chris Beaver is my name, Alderville is where I'm from. For those of you who might be wondering why I'm speaking Ojibwe, I am Ojibwe, isn't it obvious? I guess I'm aware of the fact that I'm Ojibwe, but I'm kind of like an undercover Indian. I live inside this embarrassingly gorgeous, tall, good-looking Shoganosh body. Shoganosh is the Ojibwe term for white man. So I actually grew up in a native reserve not far from here. And, I haven't lived there in over a decade, which is, sort of sad to me when I think about it. So growing up in Alderville First Nations, the only form of transit I really ever knew was the res car. And for those of you who may not know what a res car is, I developed my own definition for this purpose. Any old car can be a res car, so long as it's severely neglected, uniquely broken, and has become a hazardous version of what it once was. And then, the defining characteristic, of course, is that they've been allowed to stay on the road because of the lawlessness of First Nations reserves. When I was growing up, my father had, more res cars than I could easily count. And if I did have to count them, I think I would, it would be easiest to put them into categories. I think we had at least a couple of K cars, probably 3. I know we had 2 Ford Mercurys. One was brown and one was two-tone. It was from the bottom. The bottom was brown and the top part was baby shit yellow. And we had a number of sunbirds, if you're familiar with those. The thing about why we had a number of these cars over and over again is it was a practical decision made by my father, which was that when one car died, it would just move to the backyard and become a parts car. So we had that classic First Nations Reserve property that was basically like a car junkyard. Basically, none of my father's cars, ever cost anything more than $999.99. In fact, many of them cost much, much less. And, actually, now that I think of it, most of our cars came from Alderville's very own Niji Automotive. Niji is the Ojibwe term for trusted friend. And, these cars, when they were on Niji's lot, they weren't res cars yet. They needed, what they really needed to reach their potential was my father, who was a uniquely gifted talent for, destroying vehicles. Growing up, let me just list off some of the characteristics of our cars. No matter what the make or model was, they all kind of shared these common characteristics. One was that all of our cars were just incredibly, incredibly dirty and broken. Riding in the back seat was like sitting in a dumpster that somebody had dumped a toolbox into. Newspapers, old coffee cups, apple cores, and like power tools and screws and whatnot. You wouldn't even, seatbelts weren't a thing, you couldn't find them, and if you did, you might end up with slivers under your fingernails. And, we had cars that had, I remember one in particular, it came with, I think it was one of the Ford Mercurys, it had, like the ceiling material was droopy, and over time it got worse and worse, and you'd be sitting in the car and it would be kind of hanging over your face until my father had the clever notion to just pull it out. And what that revealed was that there's probably in most cars a thin layer of orange insulation that for the rest of the time that we owned that car in particular would fall into your hair and get into your eyeballs. We had cars that, you know, you could start without a key. We had cars where you needed a butter knife to open the trunk. One of my dad's cars, you know, I still don't know to this day how that really worked, but he would have to open the hood to start the car. He'd have to go in under the hood to start the car. As I recall, you know, a lot of these cars were most horrible in the wintertime because a number of them didn't have any heat whatsoever. So, you know, I can remember my father putting my sister and I in the back seat, and he would take his little black comb out of his back pocket, and he would clear a little eye hole about this big, which he would then later drive through. And there was a propane blowtorch that was just wedged in between the seats that he would fire up that actually, you know, we're lucky to be alive actually, but it actually really did the trick. I have one memory of my father driving down the 401, going about 120 kilometers an hour as you do. And, you know, the windshield, you know, it was wintertime and the windshield was just all salty. And his solution to this was just to literally, you know, he rolled down his window, pull out a jug of windshield washer fluid and just poured it on the windshield, which soaked him and sprayed the rest of us. We also, you know, one of the most pronounced problems that all of my childhood cars had was that they almost never had properly functioning exhaust systems. I can remember, you know, well, this actually led to my sister and I, and you know, having one of our favorite car games, which we called Robots. And there wasn't actually too much to the game Robots. Basically, you just said things to each other that a robot would say. Like, hello, I'm a robot. And the car would do the rest. The vibrations made you actually sound like a robot. And you know, I know this doesn't sound like the most exciting game, but you know, after about half an hour of breathing in exhaust fumes, it's really quite, you know, you should try it, you know, when you're cognitively impaired. You know, kids at school must have wondered why it is my sister and I always kind of smelled like gasoline and exhaust fumes despite being walkers. But what they didn't realize is that we weren't actually walkers. We would just never let Dad drop us off anywhere near school. So, yeah, like I mentioned, my dad had a unique ability to just really destroy cars quite quickly, and it wasn't of much consequence to me. But my grandpa was actually just quite the opposite. He had a beautiful, beautiful purple Dodge Ram club cab that I really, really loved. And he was the kind of guy that would, you know, pay close attention to how much air was in the tires. It was always just immaculately clean. You know, it always had that kind of new car smell inside of it. He was that kind of a guy. And secretly, I had a memory that I actually had a job pumping gas. And one time my grandpa, you know, went driving down the highway in the reserve. And my boss saw my grandpa in his truck, and he looked at me and he said, "Your grandpa drives the Cadillac of trucks." So all that to say, like, I really, really loved this vehicle, and secretly I hoped that he would will it to me someday. This was kind of a thing that I imagined when I was younger. So anyway, one Christmas, I think it was in 1999, we all had this big family Christmas on the reserve, and my grandpa was heading out to the truck, and I walked him out there to, you know, help him carry his gifts and stuff. And, you know, I kissed him on the cheek and said, "I love you," and, you know, "Merry Christmas," and kind of took one last look at the truck. And then I turned around and walked back towards the house, and I just heard the truck, you know, start revving up fully as if someone had fully put their foot down on the pedal. And, so I turned around to look, and he was gone. He started the truck, and then he died right there in the seat, Christmas Day. And of course, I wasn't thinking about my own ownership of the truck at that moment. But I also didn't realize that my worst nightmare might come true, which was that in fact my dad would become the owner of that truck. And I had to, over the years, slowly watch this beautiful truck that I love so much get absolutely destroyed. Suddenly one day it was missing a running board, or suddenly it had a broken fender. It was missing a mirror. He got in and out so many times, my dad's a real driver, that the seat started to rip open. And these little things drove me crazy. He'd keep a notebook and a pen in the visor on the driver's side. Each and every time he put that notebook and pen back, he put a pen mark across the ceiling. It just really, really irked me. Pained my heart. And I actually had this one memory in particular. We were in Belleville, and my dad had a hankering for a bologna sandwich. So we ran into a convenience store, grabbed a full pack of bologna and a loaf of bread. And this truck, it was nice and spacious. It had like a really wide, nice leather armrest in between the front and passenger seat. And my dad just jumped in the truck and he threw down everything he bought on there, and he pulled out his X-Acto knife and he just sliced right through that bologna. And right through it, and he put a huge long slice in the armrest. It was as if that armrest was my very heart. Unfortunately, eventually that truck started to have a radiator problem. And rather than addressing it, my dad just stopped every 45 minutes and poured more water into the rat, and then he eventually ruined the engine. I had developed from that experience a heart of stone and thought maybe I would never love another vehicle again. Today when I came here, this was about as far as I had got in my mind in terms of what I would say. But then as I left my building over not far from here, I looked at my own car, which I truly only own just to get me to and from the reserve, because it's in terms of transit, it's inaccessible. And I looked at my car and it's a 1999 Toyota Tercel. I broke the door handle, so you have to do a special trick to get the door open. And somebody broke into it, and I remade the broken window with cardboard and duct tape. Lovingly, I did a really beautiful, excellent job. And recently got an oil change where they told me that 1 million things are wrong with it. It has a small exhaust leak, et cetera, et cetera. And I had a moment of pride in realizing that, well, you can take the Indian off the reserve, but you can't take the reserve out of the Indian. Jimmy Gwetch.